About 10 years have passed since I walked outside of a federal prison and met Carol for the first time, but I still remember it very clearly, and it's important for me to be able to share that experience with people in jails and prisons across America. It's one of the reasons that I published Success After Prison, and it's one of the reasons that I want to distribute this book to as many people who are serving sentences right now, because they have to realize that life may be a bit of a challenge and a struggle right now, but at any given time, a person can start sowing seeds for the life that person is going to live in the future. So what I am doing right now is I am living that life in the future, or I guess the life that I visualize living while I was still locked inside of a prison. And in this part of the book, and we're continuing to read Success After Prison, in this part of the book, I am describing this day, this last day that I was serving inside of prison just after doing 25 years. So I'm going to turn, as part of our audiobook preparation, I'm going to turn to this section of our website at prisonprofessors.com and continue reading from the book. And here's the little blurb. After 25 years in prison, I transferred to a halfway house to serve my final year with the Bureau of Prisons. The decisions at the start of the sentence influenced the liberty I had at the end. Now, one of the things that I would recommend that people do if they haven't read the earlier chapters, just visit prisonprofessors.com and you can get the earlier chapters. But here is chapter 5, The Halfway House After Prison. People assigned to the dorm of the Atwater camp were still sleeping when I woke on August the 12th, 2012. Over the past several years, I adjusted my daily routine to wake when others slept and to sleep while others ran around the housing unit. I used earplugs to block the noise and a mask to cover my eyes. By 3 a.m., I pushed myself through my last exercise session from inside a federal prison, wondering how my life would change after I walked out. I had 9,135 days of imprisonment behind me, just over 25 years. At 9 a.m., Carol would drive to the prison, and together we would drive to the halfway house in the Tenderloin district of downtown San Francisco. My case manager recommended me for the maximum placement I could receive in a residential reentry center. I appreciated the privilege of serving the final 365 days of my sentence in the halfway house. After my exercise, I walked around the track alone, reflecting on the entire journey and all I learned. I went to the chapel and prayed for guidance. I knew the world had changed in many ways since I started serving my sentence, but I felt ready. In truth, I felt as prepared as I ever would have been after I had served 8 years in prison. By then, I had a master's degree and knew I would never violate a law again. Since mechanisms didn't exist to advance my release date, I would have to climb through 16 more years. As I sat in that chapel waiting, I thanked God for protecting me through the journey and for my many blessings, especially Carol. Finally, an announcement over the loudspeaker instructed me to report to the rear gate. I walked through gates that separated the minimum security camp from the penitentiary. Officers escorted me to the discharge area and began to process me. A staff member handed me a few $100s in cash from my account and indicated that I had received a check for the remainder. That was it. I walked outside and met Carol. She wore a yellow dress with a yellow ribbon tied around her waist. With tears of joy in her eyes, she hugged me, and we drove off to start our journey together. Although we were together for the first time, we weren't free. The case manager told me that I would have to report to the San Francisco halfway house within 3 hours of my release. Carol showed me a map indicating that the drive would take 3 hours, so we didn't have time for diversions. We wanted to be together, of course. Now, the time crunch dictated that we needed to get on the road because I had heard from others that if I didn't get to the halfway house in time, the case manager would deny my request for home visits for several weeks. To avoid that complication, we resisted the urge to stop for alone time, and we drove straight to the halfway house. Once we got into the car and buckled in, Carol passed me an iPhone. Smartphones didn't exist when I started my sentence. I had seen phones on televisions, but I had never held one. I put the phone to my ear. Since I didn't hear a dial tone, I thought the phone didn't work. Even though I saw the lighted face with the apps, it wasn't working the way that I anticipated it would work. She laughed as she showed me how to use an iPhone. Before that day, I had never sent an email, watched a YouTube video, or accessed the internet. Technology fascinated me, even though I didn't know how to use it. While in prison, I frequently dreamed about the internet, wondering how to use it as a tool or how it would contribute to my career. I read many books and articles to learn about the power of the web and even leveraged my relationships to participate indirectly. Since the late 1990s, I have had a web presence. I persuaded people in my support network to build websites for me. They published my articles, and they'd send images that showed how my website looked to visitors of michaelsantos.com. But there wasn't any real way to experience the web without computer access. Reading about the internet seemed about as authentic as reading about playing tennis. But without getting online, I didn't know how to appreciate the power of technology fully. While Carol gave me an iPhone, I got my first chance. As she drove, I played around with the phone, calling family and friends. Carol and I spoke about plans. Goals had carried me through 25 years inside, and I pledged to continue living a values-based, goal-oriented life. During my final year in the halfway house, I vowed to sow seeds that would allow us to start my career. I intended to create products and services that would improve outcomes for people in the criminal justice system. Create a business model to help more formerly incarcerated people transition into the job market. Create campaigns that would spread awareness of why reforming our criminal justice system made sense. I wanted to think innovatively in ways that would inspire more people to pursue paths that would lead to success upon release. Create multiple revenue streams that would build stability for Carol and me. But first things first. During my year in the halfway house, I needed to establish myself. Fortunately, I had begun making plans long before I left prison. I had job opportunities waiting. I had money in the bank. I had an extensive support network. Further, I had a product line to launch with the different books I wrote while serving my sentence. My books included Inside, Life Behind Bars in America, Earning Freedom, Conquering a 45-year prison term, Prison, My 8,344th Day, Triumph, The Straight-A Guide for Conquering Imprisonment and Preparing for Reentry, Success, The Straight-A Guide for At-Risk Youth, Profiles from Prison and About Prison. I wouldn't describe the books I wrote as masterpieces of English literature. Instead, they served a purpose: to help people understand prisons, the people they hold, and strategies for growing through prison successfully. I hoped my books would lead to credibility as I ventured into the world to start my career. I intended to use the books as tools, resources I could leverage to build a business or income streams. My friend and business partner, Justin, also provided a lot of help. Justin had built a consulting business using the lessons I wrote when we were together in prison. People going into the system could use those lessons to get a better outcome, and Justin provided one-on-one consulting services. I created a head start by working with Justin to launch that business while I was still serving my sentence. The week I got out, I had income opportunities by ghostwriting books for others. Experience convinced me that anyone could use deliberate strategies to reject negativity or overcome challenges. That universal message applies to anyone and everyone. If deliberate strategies could empower me through decades in prison, others could also use them to achieve more. People going into the system, or those serving time, should contemplate steps they can begin taking now. Regardless of external circumstances, I learned that options always existed. Regardless of what rules govern our lives at present, We can work to build skills that will influence the people we are going to meet and the opportunities that will open for us. We may not be able to change our current predicament, but we can always work to change ourselves. Halfway to liberty. I'll never forget my thoughts as Carol drove me across the Bay Bridge, taking us from Richmond to San Francisco. The majestic skyline inspired me. I felt so good to be in a major American city. Carol dropped me off in front of the halfway house, and the staff buzzed me inside. I didn't have any trouble navigating the rules. After decades in federal prison, everything seemed easy. The intake officer assigned me to a 2-person room, but my roommate wasn't there. I sat in a chair and began experimenting with the iPhone, connecting with the world. Although I got to the halfway house on a Monday, my case manager, Charles, didn't meet with me until Thursday. While doing his intake paperwork, Charles commented on the length of time that I had served. He suggested that I participate in counseling sessions to help me acclimate. Before going to that meeting, I prepared for such a recommendation by gathering books I wrote, support letters I had received, curriculum vitae that listed my published writings, and job offers from an employer confirming that I could start working as soon as the halfway house authorized me to begin. How did you get all this done while you were in prison? He did not expect to see so many resources from someone who served 25 years. As Charles flipped through the books, I could sense how the tangible work I presented influenced his perception. Instead of seeing me as the ex-convict who served a quarter century and needed counseling, he treated me as a man. The case manager said he would give me as much liberty as his position authorized. When he excused me from having to waste time in counseling classes, I felt relieved. In an instant, I had credibility with him, and to the extent he was able, Charles agreed to assist with the plan I laid out for my first year in society. That initial meeting with Charles went well. Without a doubt, I felt fortunate to have him as my case manager, as I know it could have gone differently. Had I not brought those tangible resources with me, I would have had to waste hours going through several classes before I would qualify for work release. He treated me with dignity, as if we were two men rather than as if I were an inferior human being just released from prison. Why? Well, the roots of that successful meeting extended way back to the 1980s when I waited for sentencing from inside the special housing unit of the Pierce County Jail. Recap: while in my cell, I read about Socrates. From his story, I learned the importance of living for something greater than myself. Instead of dwelling on the challenges of my decisions, I could empower myself by thinking about others. Through Socratic questioning, I could learn the relationship between my decisions and how others would perceive me. With that insight, I began contemplating people like Charles, case managers and probation officers, before my judge even imposed my 45-year sentence. They were my avatars. I could create plans to influence their perceptions by thinking about what they would expect. I believed I could influence a better outcome upon release by executing those plans every day of my sentence. Those plans gave me hope and helped me to restore confidence, as if I could control some aspect of my life. Still, I felt fortunate to have a case manager who treated me well. Some readers may be familiar with the social scientist Abraham Maslow and his theory about the hierarchy of needs. Maslow wrote that we could not reach our highest potential unless we first satisfied our basic needs. For example, to appreciate the value of education or art, we first need to make sure that we have basic needs like food, clothing, and shelter. The same principle would apply to my adjustment in society. I needed identification to make a complete adjustment after a quarter century of confinement. For the past month, I had been studying a handbook from the Department of Motor Vehicles, and I asked Charles for permission to go to the Department of Motor Vehicles. I wanted to register for the driving test. He granted my first pass for 3 hours, allowing me to walk to the DMV. And here are some self-directed questions for those who are inside of a jail cell and wanting to work toward their own preparation for success. What strategy have you put in place to influence your transition from prison to society? What will your case manager think about you the day that you transition to a halfway house? What can you begin doing today to influence the level of liberty your case manager will grant? I hope that you are working through these programs if you're locked inside of a struggle. The same strategies that powered me through 26 years in prison, I'm really convinced can help other people who are going through challenging times. My challenge was really going through a quarter century in prison, but it's no different from people out here who are facing challenges of an entirely different order. In fact, as I frequently say when I'm speaking, I've met more people in society that live in a prison of their own making, and that prison can be more restrictive than the different prisons that confined me for a quarter century. It's because they think in such a way that they don't see, I may not be able to change external circumstances of my life, but I can always change myself. And that's what the message I try to convey anytime I go into a prison or a jail. I help people see we may not be able to change past circumstances, but we can absolutely change ourselves. That is the key to success as I learned success while going through prison. You see, in prison, an important thing to remember is that it's like being out on the sea, right? It's like being out on the sea, and we could think of a couple of analogies, right? Think of you're like in a sailboat, and the wind is blowing. The wind blows the same for everybody in the prison. Okay, everybody's got to deal with the political situation. Everybody's got to deal with the same administration. Everybody's got to deal with family and external circumstances outside. Everybody. They all have the same circumstances. The wind blows on all of us, but not all of us get the same result. Some of us change our sails in such a way that responds to the wind. And when we change our sails in such a way, we can get to shore. We can get to safety a lot sooner. And so it's what I strive to teach and what I strive to have our entire team teach at Prison Professors. You may not be able to control the wind, but you can always control how you are going to respond when those winds blow. And you need to remember that when you're going into this system, regardless of what stage you're in. If you didn't read the earlier chapters, I do encourage you to visit us at prisonprofessors.com, or if you're inside of a jail or a prison and you're just going through this course on one of the tablets, make sure you search for these chapters in sequential order. But again, if you're outside listening to this on iTunes or watching on YouTube, we do encourage you to subscribe and to support our work. We are striving to be the change that we want to see in the world, and we believe in you. I am Michael Santos, and on behalf of our entire team at prisonprofessors.com, I want to thank you for being a part of our community.